Be like Berl. Be the good in the world. Be like Berl.
Hey everybody, welcome to our Be Like Berl podcast, where we interview folks about a tragedy, trial, tribulation that they dealt with as a child, and how Jesus brought them through it by using folks in their lives who were being like Berl. Today's guest is here, but before I hand it over to Rachel, remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Rachel?
Okay, so hey guys, today we have a special guest in the podcast studio. We're usually interviewing someone in their early 20s or late teens, but today we have somebody just a little bit older in the studio.
Old lady.
You might remember Dylan from a previous podcast, and today we have his mom in studio. This is Valerie Tanner Woodall, and she is going to talk to us about some things that she went through during her childhood. And I want to just start out with like how this is kind of a thing that worked out today. We had somebody else scheduled. They at the last minute had to drop out. We saw Valerie's mamaw yesterday, who we all love, and she said Valerie needs to tell her story. And so that just kind of started working on me and Jim, and we started talking about some things and called Valerie up. And of course, she was, as always, willing to jump in and do whatever. And so we're here today because she has a story to tell. So, all right, Valerie, tell us, I guess let's just say what you've been through. I guess we could just list it out. So, a child of divorce. Then what?
So my mom and dad divorced whenever I was 6. And then at the age of 7, my dad was murdered. And then a couple of years later is whenever the trial was. And
then had a period of a not so nice stepdad.
Yes. And then a teen pregnancy.
And so let's start with, do you remember anything or any thoughts or feelings when your mom and dad got divorced? You were 6, right?
Yes. I don't remember a lot. I know I remember my dad talking about wanting to get back with my mom. My dad actually started therapy because he had some young trauma. And it's funny because now thinking back, like that was very, very uncommon. I mean, even now, a lot of times men are hesitant sometimes about therapy, but he did. And I remember him working hard on himself. And I remember my mom and him, you know, like him coming over. I remember him doing my schoolwork with me because he was very, very, very strict about my schoolwork and wanting me to have that education and do better than him. That's what he, always stressed. He didn't want me to work so hard in life.
Mm-hmm. And they were working on reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And then through a chain of unfortunate events, what happened?
It was storming one night. I remember the day he left. Is he now? I'm going to cry. Like, I need to stop. Hold on. No. But the day that he left, we was at my grandmother's house, my grandparents, his parents, and my cousin Josh was there, my mom, and it was supposed to storm really bad that night. And my grandmother, being she worried all the time about everything, and she was telling him to be careful. And he looked at Josh and he said, Tell Mama that I'll be fine. And he looked up at Mama and he said, Uncle Emmy will be fine, because he couldn't say Timmy. And I remember my dad leaving, and he beeped the horn all the way down the holler, like, past Aunt Carolyn and Aunt Jeanette's house. I remember him beeping, because that was him. He was very lively all the time. And then in the middle of the night, we got a phone call from my grandmother, and it did storm really bad that night. And we got a phone call that he hadn't made it home, and she thought maybe that he had stopped at the apartment in Centerville where we lived and come to, stay with us because of the storm. And, of course, he wasn't there. And then she tried calling his boss and, calling around. And then at some point, and I remember Mom waking me up to pray. And I remember going into the living room and praying. And then at some point, and I don't, because there's a lot of glimpses there that I don't remember, But I remember everybody coming over to the apartment, like the whole family was all there. And I was outside on the little playground swinging, and my Uncle James and my grandfather left. And whenever they come back, I remember hearing like wells of cry. And so I got off the swing and I started walking back to the apartment. And whenever I did, my Aunt Felicia stopped me. And she looked at me, and I don't know why, but I just looked and I said, "He's dead." And she just shook her head yes and grabbed me. And then we went up to the apartment, and whenever did, my mom and my grandmother was on the couch, and I just remember them grabbing me and crying. The only other thing I remember about that day is my Aunt Deborah having to be taken away in an ambulance. And I didn't understand that at all. Now I know, why, because she was hyperventilating. And I remember her being in my room, I think, on the bed afterwards and sleeping, because I'm sure they, gave her something. But that's all I remember at all about that day.
And so one of the things that you put in here was that the day your dad was murdered, your entire family changed.
Oh, yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? It's okay.
Sorry. He was the life of the house. I mean, whenever he was around, you had a good time. I mean, he was constantly joking. You never had to guess if he was loved. And whenever he was killed, it was like a doom over the family. My grandfather, his dad, met the mail truck that night. It later came out that my dad was not driving that truck. The man that killed him was driving the truck, and my dad's body was in the back. And that haunted my grandfather really bad. And I remember beforehand, I have memories of my mama and papa joking, dancing around the living room, and being lovey-dovey. And afterwards, I don't remember a lot of that, because it was like they both closed off a part of them whenever he left. There was some, like my Aunt Kim and I had a long conversation about that drew her closer to God in church. Her and my Uncle James was not that involved in church until it happened, and because of it is why they got heavily involved in church. But it was just our family functions in the daily life had just totally changed.
So for those of you that don't know, and we'll have a picture of it up that Sean can put up, but Valerie's dad was the 1991 postal worker that was murdered and found under the Bucksnort Bridge in Hickman County. And the guy that murdered him had a previous relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like a random act of violence.
No.
It was an intentional act.
Yes, they had found afterwards where he knew what time my dad went to what post office. He had followed him previously, and he had very much calculated and planned out what he was going to do.
And because of the murder, I mean, not only did your grandparents and all your dad's sisters, because he was the only boy
Yes.
and a handful of sisters, so he was rotten, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And
He was the protector.
so not only did the dynamic change with them, but Valerie's mom, who was working on reconciliation, then carried her own guilt. I mean, her own just sadness, and just your life changed with your mom too, right?
Yes, very much so. I mean, she struggled.
Oh, yeah.
She struggled from, at that point then being a single mom. And her relationship, of course, changed with my grandparents, my dad's parents. And so she was very close to them and my aunts. And there for a time period, I mean, now that's changed. But, there for a little while, that was a difficult relationship for them all. And I went from having this one big happy family and, where you come over to Easter, everybody did, to both sides of the family was all together celebrating, to everything being very separate. So, that was a dramatic change too. And very hard. And my mom had to deal with a lot at that time.
You talk about this actually being the first experience of death you ever had.
Yes. Before that, I had a dog that had passed and a rabbit. I do know of those two incidents now, but my dad hid those from me. He took care of it and then told me, they ran off or he gave them away or I never had experienced death at all until that. And so that was one thing with my children I even changed because I didn't want them to be sheltered from it. I, of course, didn't throw it in their face, but if they wanted to be a part, whenever my great-grandmother passed away, Luke didn't want to go, and Dylan asked to come. And he was there whenever she took her final breaths. And that was one thing I never sheltered from my kids. And I think it was because it was very traumatic for me that was my first death, was my dad. Mm-hmm. And I did not understand it at all.
And so one of the things that you had in here, the only thing that you remembered at the funeral was Freebird playing.
Yes. I remember Freebird being played. And even Dylan, my youngest that was on the podcast, has a tattoo in memory of my dad, and it's an eagle, and it has Freebird on it. But that was one of his favorite songs, was Freebird.
And you talked about they asked you, did you want to kiss him goodbye?
Mm-hmm. And I was terrified because that wasn't my dad. He was cold and clammy, and there was actually one part I do remember sitting there and looking at him and thinking, maybe I should. I felt obligated, I guess, to in my 7-year-old brain. And so me being, if anybody that knows me knows how I am. So here I decide just to climb up the casket and try to give him a kiss. And as I'm being my little monkey self trying to climb up the casket starts moving. So then everybody runs to grab me and, everything. And then I was like, oh, no. Yeah, I was done after that. But that is one of the only things that I do remember was being scared kind of him because it wasn't him.
I remember being in and seeing his body there in the casket. And I remember, because I was 12 at the time, I think, 11, something like that. I think it was 11. And he, for me, it was being one of the first times I dealt with it also that I can remember back, and just seeing no life there, seeing, and like Val said, her dad was, he was just, he taught me how to ride a four-wheeler. He loved to throw the football. He just loved to hunt. The guy stuff. It was constant. When I started hunting, my first hunting rifle was 30-30, which was his. I remember when we got that from him, and anyway, he was just always full of life. That was a good way to put that about your dad. And I remember just sitting there looking at him in the casket and just being in awe. I was just taken back because it was all that life and that aura was not there at the time.
And just to add that, Jim, just to give a little history there, went on my mom and dad's first date with them. That was their child until I came along. And I still, to this day, say that Jim is my mom's favorite child. But he was very much involved in their life.
Yeah.
I still remember me and you and him on that three-wheeler, on that big red in front of Mema's house when I he was trying to teach me how to drive it, and I hit the gas too much. And of course, like three-wheelers will do, they jumped and went backwards. And of course, Uncle Demi hit the ground first, and then Val, and then me. So she was like the sandwich in between the both of us. And so I just remember him just laughing. I mean, he's just laughing, and we had to jump off and get the three-wheeler turned upside down. But I still remember that.
Oh.
If he was around, you was having a good time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I can't imagine the tragedy that you guys have all been through in this process. You talking here about afterwards the news crews came to the house and you watched the news, and one clip particularly has haunted you.
Yes. And then there was a newspaper clipping that showed the back of the truck. But in one of the newscasts, they actually showed him in the body bag and them bringing the body bag out of the back of the truck and onto the stretcher. And all I knew was that my dad was in that bag, and that bothered me. I remember going to bed at night and even dreaming about him being in that bag closed up.
Mm-hmm. So if anybody out there is listening, and they've had a similar, situation, whatever, there is hope at the end of this, right? There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And we're going to talk more and more about what's going on with Valerie's life, but I feel like she's got like several chapters that we're going to go through today.
She's a mess.
I mean, I am.
We're going to go through several chapters. And so as we move on, just know that as we're keeping on talking, that if you've experienced something similar, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I know I'll say this again at some point in the podcast, but if anybody knows Valerie, if you know her, you love her. She talks about her dad brings the joy, but you get that honest, apparently, because you bring the joy. And so there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to go a little bit towards the next chapter and talk about kind of what happened after all of that. Where did life go after the murder?
So my mom remarried, and it was a terrible situation. He was not a great guy. Thankfully, that did not last. But after they divorced, my mom started dispatching in Centerville, and she worked odd hours and then eventually started working midnights. And so during that time, whenever she was at work, I lived with my grandparents, my dad's parents. After my dad was killed, we moved in with my mom's parents for a while. And then later, so I lived with all of them at one point. But they helped me. I stayed with them, and of course, my grandmother had that watchful eye all the time on me and made sure I was straight. And I was so terrified always of disappointing her too. So if it wasn't for her, then I would probably been on a much worse track.
And a lot of that probably stems from you had seen so much pain that they had been through, and you just didn't want to cause any more pain in their life. But let's go back to just for a second. You talked about it being a terrible situation, and your mom obviously had her own grief, and she, bless her heart, there's no telling what she went through. But when you say a terrible situation, I mean, he was not a nice guy, right? I mean,
no.
And again, when you're grieving, you do some crazy things, right? I mean, that's totally understandable. But
and of course, he wasn't that way at the beginning,
right? Oh yeah, no, for sure. But that plays into the part about you being with your grandparents too, right? I mean,
yes.
But just because he was not a good person.
No.
And your mom wisened up quickly.
Yeah. Sent him packing. I think actually he'd come home and his stuff was outside, and that's when my mom is a very strong and brave woman. If you know her, you are not messing with her, and she is definitely a mama bear. Whenever it comes to me or my boys. And and I'm very thankful for my grandmother and the strength and love and nurture that she is to all of us. I mean, all of my cousins was raised like siblings to me, and with my mom and her sister being so close, I was always with Jim and Andy. And then at my grandmother's house, it was a chaotic mess all the time with all my cousins there. And I'm very thankful, too, to also had the uncles that I had in my life between, Jim's dad, my Uncle Timmy, and who always showed a very Christian and loving, like, if you know him, you're going to get a hug, like the love that he has. And then,
and he almost can't talk to you sometimes without tearing up because he just loves you so much.
He loves you. And between him and my Uncle James and my Uncle James's Christian values, and then my Uncle Danny, I always had a male figure with my grandfathers or my uncles to help guide me and not take the place of my dad, but be what I needed.
Mm-hmm. And so mom is working dispatch, working nights, and then what happens after that?
Moving into that chapter?
Well, do you want to talk about, just go ahead. Who did mom meet after that?
So she met Tim.
Let's clarify for 1 second, though. Her dad's name was
Tim.
Her Uncle Timmy is Jim's dad.
And both of them were Tim Tanners.
Yeah. And her stepdad that we love is Tim Buchanan. And we call him Papa Tim, or Buck, Uncle Buck. So,
Well, I was going to say our viewers will know him from the Berl books as Officer Buck, the inspiration for the first one.
So just to clarify, yes, her dad's name is Tim. And
a lot
then,
of Tims.
Yes, she had an uncle named Tim. It's all different people. So we're just clarifying. This is not Alabama or anything. But all right, go ahead.
But Tim came into our life. I won't ever forget. It was during election time, and we was at the East Community Center for someone, candidate trying for a position, and he at the time was an officer. My mom was a dispatcher, and we went there, and I knew she had been talking to somebody, but I didn't know him. And my friend Stephanie was with me, and we went there, and he come up talking to us and was aggravating us, and he was so nice and so sweet. And afterwards, Mom asked, she's like, "So what do you think about him?" And I'm like, "Oh, Mom, he's like 2 thumbs and a toe." And he never, ever let me live that down. I will say that I say all the time that God blessed us with him. Like, yes, he was a blessing to my mom, but he was also such a blessing to me. He lost his father whenever he was 13 years old. And so he never, ever tried to take the place of my dad, but he was there for me as a dad. And, always, if I needed something going through the parole hearings, where the person that murdered my dad would go for parole. Tim even asked whenever we was going, "Do you want me to come with you? Do you need me? I'm here." He was one of the first ones to call me as soon as it was over. He was always so, so supportive. But if you knew him, you also knew how much he aggravated and tormented people. And so every time he would do something to me, like pass gas or, pull my finger, or I'd trip and he laughed, he would say, "Oh, don't forget, I'm 2 thumbs and a toe." He never let me forget that.
So, yes, and Buck was, it was funny because we were talking about a while ago when Uncle Timmy was here, how it was the life of the party. And it was funny how Buck had that same type of aura.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's nuts about it, and is that both of these 2 great men had that same type of joking, goofing off type mentality and type spirit. And I remember meeting Buck, and then all of a sudden, of course, you fall in love with him just immediately because you're laughing and everything else. And I remember thinking he was the first time that I could look at your mom and not think about your dad.
Well, and the first time that the light come back on in Mom's eyes.
Absolutely. And to really see that kind of joy in her again, And
it's funny also talking about the similarities between the 2, because my dad was the oldest, the only boy, and he was such a protector over his mom and his little sisters, but also his entire family. And he was always the first to help somebody. And then comes the other Tim along later in life, and he's the same way. He would bend over backwards and give somebody, his shirt off his back to help. And they was both very similar in that way also.
Yeah. And so I know that the death of Papa Tim was as an adult, so we won't get into a ton of that. However, I did notice that one of the things that you put on here was something that might help people cope through a similar, circumstance or whatever. But you put that you lost both your dad and Tim in a tragic way, and you could have a pity party. However, so many people don't get to experience the type of father that you had, so you choose to look at it like God blessed you.
Oh, yes.
With two dads that were amazing. And so...
two very remarkable men, that I could either have a pity party and, but as Tim always said, suck it up, cupcake.
Yeah.
And that's it, suck it up and realize like I was, some people don't even know their father. And I was blessed enough to not have one, but two amazing father figures in my life.
So you don't focus on the tragedy, you focus on the blessing that they were for you.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really important lesson within itself in this story. As we're continuing on, it's like, I know you lost your dad at a young age and you lost him like later in life, but you could be here bitter and be like, well, I lost one and now I've lost two, but you're not, again.
And, I could use it as an excuse. And I guess because some people will also say, like, don't have a pity party. And I think that everybody can be entitled to have a pity party every now and then.
Right.
But also get over it.
Because grief comes in waves, too.
Yes, and it does. And it's sometimes the most ridiculous, dumb time, and it's like not whenever you think it should be, but over something else, and then it hits you. Tim had old blue, an old truck, and Luke had it, and then he gave it to Dylan because he didn't drive it very often. And so he gave it to Dylan to have a 4-wheel drive truck. And the other day he sends me a video driving old blue and singing Silver Wings. And that's what Tim's karaoke song was. If he ever sung karaoke, he would get up and sing that. We played that at his funeral. And he's going down the road and he's just singing his little heart out, and I lost it. I mean, I was a hot mess for a little while after that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's grief, right? As hitting you at those times and those moments. It was the ups and downs and it always goes. But the strength through that is what the story is. Is it's good to have those cries. Those are memories. Those are that lets you know that you loved and you were loved when you have that kind of pain. And so you need to cherish onto those moments, hold on to those moments. But life does still continue. And so if you can't just sit there in that type of thought forever, you have got to, in your family, the ones that have left would want you to pick up and move forward, no matter what that looks like.
And, afterwards it was the Be Like Buck hashtag went around. And that's what I want to live my life like, is be like my dad and be like Buck. Tim, he always hated us calling him Buck, but
You got over it.
I know, but to live my life like they would have, and for them to be proud of me, because I know that they are still watching over me, and I can hear them now if I wasn't.
So your dad is murdered. You go through a period of time with a not so nice stepdad. Mom meets a new guy who's just really checking all the boxes and everybody loves him and he brings the light back to your family. And then what happens?
And then I find out I'm pregnant.
At how old?
Oopsie.
16.
Oopsie.
So what was it like finding out you were 16 and having to tell your family?
Well, for 3 months I was in complete denial. Refused to believe it. And then Stephanie, the one that was with me whenever we met Tim, bought a pregnancy test and forced me to take it. And it wasn't very long till that little line popped up, and pretty immediately. And we thought about running away and leaving notes for our parents and family. We had all kinds of ideas of what to do and was terrified to tell our family. And that was difficult. My mom, of course, so Derek was his dad. They was working out in the shop. He built cabinets, and Derek would help him. And he always had dreams, and it was most of the time reality. You know, he had a dream I was pregnant and going to have a boy. And he asked Derek if that was true. And we hadn't planned on telling them at this point. But of course he wasn't going to lie. And so he tells his dad yes. And then he said, well, now you got to go tell your mama. And so then he had to go in and tell his mom. And then he called me and he said, they've agreed not to say anything until you tell your mom and your family. And so that's whenever I went in there, and Mom was mopping the floor. And whenever I went in there, I said, I need to tell you something. And the back of the recliner faced the kitchen. And I was sitting backwards in the recliner looking at her. And she's like, oh, what, you're pregnant or something? And I just stared at her, and she's like, no. Are you serious? And I just started crying. And then she went and called her sister.
That
And
would be
didn't
my
talk
mom.
to me anymore. And then I went, and the next one was telling my grandmother. And, you know, and that's one thing. I had such an amazing support, you know, and my mama, I can always account on. She's always been there for me and all of my cousins, always to be our little pillar of strength and love. And then I had to tell Jim. And that was one of the last ones I told, because I procrastinated that so long, because Jim has always been like my big brother. And that was hard.
Well, and yes, you know, it was difficult to hear, sure. Immediately was anger at Derek. I remember, like, it don't take two to tango. But I remember, was we at a baseball game?
Football, I think.
Football, maybe. And I threatened him. I mean, I and that's not the right thing to do either. But I just told him, I said, you're going to have to step up.
Which he was.
And he did. Derek's, and, you know, we learned from Dylan's podcast, or we didn't learn, we knew this, but Dylan talked about how good of a dad he's got, and Derek, he did. He did what he was supposed to do, and I was very proud of him for that. But at that time, how old was Derek? Derek was 17?
17.
17, yeah, he was 16. And I just remember telling him, dude, you're going to have to, this ain't cool, but ain't nothing we can do about it now, so you're just going to have to step up.
So one of the things that I had wrote down to ask you was, because somewhere out there, we hope that if there's somebody that has found out that they're a teenager and they're pregnant, that they see this podcast and they see the joy that you bring and that you're on here talking about this. And if abortion is on their mind, that they're going to listen to you. So was abortion ever an option for you?
Never for a second.
And did anybody talk to you about abortion?
Mm-mm. No. If I'd even thought about it, I'm pretty sure that my family would have kidnapped me, put me in a room until I had the baby. But no. And I was 17 whenever he was born, and Derek was 18. And it was hard. I mean, the fear of not knowing what I was going to do, feeling like my life had ended at that moment. Because I was a baby, going to have to raise a baby. And it ended up being the greatest blessing ever in my life.
Because you feel like Luke did what?
He saved my life. A lot of my friends at that time started going down a really bad path. And all I cared about was getting home to my baby. And as soon as we went to the first doctor's appointment, and we all said the same thing. It was me, Mom, and Derek all went. And Derek never missed one appointment with me. He was by my side the entire time. But that very first appointment, the doctor said, "What, do you want to see it? See the baby?" And we was like, okay. And all of a sudden on that little screen, there's little head, arms, and legs. And I instantly fell in love that second. I always say I wouldn't advise it at all.
Right.
I missed out, I didn't go to my prom, my junior prom, because I had a little baby at that time. And I didn't go party, and I didn't get to go off to college and stay in a dorm. But instead, I had our little family, and my baby that was the biggest miracle and blessing in my life.
And I think it's notable for anybody listening to this podcast. If you are an adult in a situation like this, regardless of the situation and how that baby got there, children are a heritage from the Lord, like it says in Psalms. And I feel like your family totally embraced that verse when they said, okay, let's do this. Like, this is what's in front of us, and this is how we're going to handle it. And they just looked at it with love and grace and just picked up and carried on. And
Yeah, I'll say that was never. There was a lot of discussion back and forth on what can we do to help Val. What's coming, what's going to be next.
well, I can say something funny about something we did. I drove her to school for 3 months, and we had to stop and puke every morning on the way.
About at the fire tower every time.
But I remember as a family we talked a lot about it, and not once did taking the life of the child come up. Now, that's not to say that there's so many women out there that have had abortions, and it's not. We don't want to make you think that what you did was, that you've now cannot be forgiven by God, and that was so evil and this and the other. No, that's not true. God loves you, and Jesus died on the cross for you, just like He did for me and everybody else. But really, we're trying to reach the ones that are pregnant right now, and they're being told, maybe getting told, or they might have that thought process, that to have an abortion, and we're saying reach out.
Or maybe they don't have a family like Valerie does, but
Right.
there are other options.
Yes, I mean there's all kinds of help out there to please try to seek help, and don't take that avenue, don't take that path.
And we've talked about this before. You and I have. I don't know if me and Valerie have or not, but abortion has been made into such a political issue right now, and it's not a political issue.
No.
It's a biblical issue, and we believe Psalm 139 that you knitted me together in my mother's womb. So babies, they're babies, they're humans in the womb, and so we believe that as a family. And I like to hear you say that when I said abortion was never an option, you said not for a second. Mm-mm. And we don't condemn anybody who is considering that. We're not condemning you. We're just saying, look, there's a better option. Yes, she missed out on some things, but she now, looking back, feels like Luke saved her life.
And not only, like, one, yes, Luke saved my life and abortion was never an option, but also, if you do feel like in your life you can't, there's also adoption. And there's
Right.
some amazing people out there.
Just waiting.
That's just waiting and hoping for a little miracle.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And it's I promise that if you make the decision to carry the child and to have the child, that will be better than what you have to deal with. Because I've talked to several ladies that have had an abortion, and they feel sadness.
There's always
There's always a grief that's there, because they know that was a life.
And it was a different time in their life.
Yeah,
too,
different
I'm
time in
sure,
their life, and that and I will talk to them and say that, look, that was a decision that's in the past. That's no longer, Jesus. That you can ask forgiveness for that. We can move on. That's you don't take the path of depression because you feel like I've done this. We can move on from this, but having the child you'll have your struggles and your ups and downs, but there's a happiness and a joy that can be had in that, and to seeing that baby.
And God always makes a way,
Absolutely.
I really feel that way. Because even if, for me, I am extremely blessed. I have, whenever that says it takes a village, I had a village between, my mom, who was always there, my mama, who, would keep them, both Luke and Dylan. But at this point, Luke, my Aunt Deborah, she kept Luke for me while I was going to school. My Aunt Kim, my Aunt Felicia, my Aunt Christy, all of them, Aunt Sivy, everybody, my cousins, my friends, I had a huge support network, and I understand some people don't, but my view on it also is you can always get that. There's several different communities offer support for young mothers or single mothers. Also, I mean, church family, friends, there's always a village that you can find.
That you can tap into.
You will not be alone.
No.
Even if you feel like you are.
If not, you can just call me too, and I'll be there for you.
Yeah, reach out to us.
I mean, now I'll love some baby snuggles.
Well, and I think, that's going back to you saying that the world tries to make it so political now. And they do. They make it such a political issue, and it's like, wow, y'all put all that off the table and just think about the mom, think about what she's going through, think about that life that's within her. What can we do as a group and a community to help them both and love and to care and not even, it's just the world we live in,
And
unfortunately.
I mean, there was a lot of shame. I remember walking into my senior year pregnant. I mean, so many did not even know I was pregnant. I was embarrassed, and I felt shameful. And, and I'm sure there was talk, but nobody ever did to my face, and I had more support than I, thought I would.
Right.
And then I was homeschooled for just a little bit during that time, while I was nearing the end of my pregnancy and at the beginning.
There was no going virtual back then. There was no internet.
No. I had Miss Patsy Pinker come to the house and help me with my studies. And, and there was, it was all worked out. And of course, me not finishing my high school diploma was never a question. That was main thing on the table for my family.
Because you just said earlier that education was really important to your dad.
And so they all made sure that was fulfilled.
And you know that peers, the kids can be cruel. We understand that, and we know that. But I hope that if anybody's watching, that a pregnant young lady that's having to deal with this understands that there are people out there that care too. It's the whole world's not bad. I promise Jesus works through people to come and help you.
Yeah, if you're, so I'll just throw this out there. If you're not being supported at home and you are young and you are pregnant and you don't know really where to find yourself, come to Hope Church.
Yeah.
Come to Hope Church. Come to church where Valerie goes to church. You want to plug your church?
Nunley United Methodist.
So come to church with one of us.
And if you're, I'll say this too, if you are going through those struggles, if you are pregnant, and there's nobody to support you, all you're hearing is the other side, you can reach out to us through the website, through burlsquiver.com, through the Facebook page, whatever. Please reach out to us, and I promise we'll help you find the help that you need.
And I will say too, also, it's a mindset thing also. I'm sure there was a lot of negative talk, but I chose not to focus on the negativity and just steer towards the positivity. And the positive people that supported me, and everybody else could forget themselves.
The Berls in your life.
Yes,
for lack of a better term.
exactly.
Yeah. So, and to that, there was not social media back then.
No.
So there was no online whatever going on. So, yes, that would be a little different now probably, but I love your you just focused on the positive,
And surrounded myself with positive people.
Yeah. Are there any words of encouragement that you want to give a teenage mom out there? I know you said on here about talking to people, which is probably related to the passing of your dad, but I guess for anything, any words of encouragement to folks listening that might help with them cope with a similar issue for either thing, like loss of a spouse, crazy stepdad, chapter 3, teen pregnancy.
Yes. The one thing I guess for my childhood is I was scared to talk about it. And I think I even said in there, whenever I cried or talked about dad, then Mama or my mom would cry. So then I felt in my 7-year-old brain, I was making them cry. And in reality, it was just because they were sad too, but I didn't understand that. And even as I got older, then I felt like, well, that was so many years ago. Nobody wants to hear about my PD story or, but just talking about it to somebody that you trust is important. And even being pregnant as a teenager was terrifying. But having somebody positive that you can reach out to. And I think that's where some people do mess up because they have some negative people in their life and that's who they focus more on. But finding that positive light to give you words of wisdom and to really speak to you and help you make good decisions and what to do.
So I do want to add that we'll also add some resources for any of you out there that if you're a teen or a young adult that's pregnant and you're having a hard time with it, or there's people there that are not there to support you, we will leave some links in the comments to be able to help you through that. And there'll be some national organizations as well as we'll do some local here to us right here in Middle Tennessee.
So the next thing on here we've got, are there any words of encouragement or wisdom that you want to say to folks listening that might help them get through or cope with a similar issue?
Is one, talk to someone. I mean, if you don't have that person in your life personally, there is resources, even, therapists and therapy centers that you can even speak with, but talk about it. Don't just hold it in and think that you have to be tough and get through it on your own. Like, so many think, well, I got myself into this situation.
Right.
But, and that might be true, but you're not alone still.
Right. And then what are some thoughts of is there anything like what not to do that comes to your mind?
One, not giving up hope. Don't always look to the negative. Look for the positive in every situation.
You have in here, that you wouldn't advise getting pregnant was such a blessing. But back then, there wasn't the podcast a podcast to listen to or learn from. But again, we just hope this reaches somebody that needs to hear this message.
Because God will provide a way for you. A baby is a miracle and such a blessing in your life. Mm-hmm. And like I said, even if it's not your life, it could be a blessing to somebody else that's looking for that child that can't have a baby.
We're actually talking right now to our teen group.
Oh, wow. I was just fixing to go there. Go ahead.
We're actually talking to our teen group at church right now, and we're talking about dating for marriage, and not that they're getting married right now, but we're talking in 10 years, right? Which is crazy to think about because Bella's in our teen class now. But it's dating to marriage so that you know what expectations are, biblically speaking, you know what expectations are. I think it'd be great to have Valerie come and talk to them.
Well, I mean, and you don't, again, the right thing to do is, of course, to abstain, right? And to wait until you're married and you find that one person and you're in love, and then you get married, and then you do the thing that can cause the pregnancy. But things happen, and it is what it is. And once it does happen, it's okay. Mm-hmm. If it happens, it's all right. You're still loved. There's people that still care about you. Yeah. And,
again, there's hope on the other side of it.
Yes, it's not the end of the world.
And I just lost my train of thought there.
So how do you feel like God has worked in your situation? You had several things on here. You wouldn't have made it through what you went through without family, of course, but you've also got in here about church and a special children's Bible.
Yes. So whenever my dad was in the funeral home, Miss Johnny Ruth Elrod, she owned Town Choir at that time, and I remember her coming to the funeral home. I do remember that, and she gave me this children's Bible, and it, of course, it had all the books of the Bible, but it had, the biblical stories for children all through it. And I remember Mom reading, her and I reading that together. That, and every night before we went to bed, after my dad was killed, I remember us saying the Lord's Prayer together every night before we went to bed. We would pray and end with the Lord's Prayer. And of course, growing up in Pleasantville, there wasn't a lot to do.
No.
And so every time either any of the churches had some kind of
Yeah.
event, all of us kids were all there.
There were no denominational lines for us kids.
No, we didn't care. Just where's everybody getting together and having fun? We don't care.
Exactly. And of course, if you want a bunch of kids to hop around to different places, you want it to be churches. But,
Yeah, sure.
you know, that's one
Church
thing.
hopping.
Exactly. All the different denominations, we didn't care.
Yeah.
But having all the different churches, but being raised that way, you know,
Yeah.
in church, that's one thing my mom was always had us involved in church. My grandfather always, my Papa Hubert, my dad's dad, always had a Bible at the church or at the house beside his, you know, chair. And then my mama, both of my great grandmothers, you know, were very Christian women, my Mama Pearl and my Mama Pauline. And I remember, and of course, my great grandfathers were too, but I just really remember them really speaking
Right.
about God. And so it was always in my life.
And so that would have made it an easy transition, even though it probably wasn't what you were allowed to be out doing.
No.
You did it nonetheless. And it was an easy transition for them to just open their arms with love and acceptance and
Yes.
say, it's going to be okay. We're going to get you through this.
And it isn't just, and I will add, it wasn't just my family. I mean, Derek was great. He never missed an appointment with me and was by my side through both my
Yeah.
pregnancies. We got married right after high school. I graduated next month, got married. And we wanted to start our family off the right way at that point. And we built a house together and a great life for many years and until we divorced. But his family, and to this day, his family is great. And I still speak to them. And we always say, you know, and Derek and I get along to this day. Him and Jesse get along great.
You and Derek, and we talked about it with Dylan, but you and Derek co-parented very well, and y'all have been a good example of if that happens and there is divorce, and there's children involved, how to do that.
Well, and that was one of whenever we had decided to divorce, the main thing, one, he had said, you know, please don't take them away from me. I still want to be in their life. And me not having my dad, that was one thing that I was very big on, is him being involved. And he was. Whenever we say co-parenting, we probably took it to an extreme in a way. But, you know, if they was sick, he knew about it. You know, I always told him, or if they was at his house and was sick, then I knew about it. So that way we could call and check on them. It was always open for him to stop by the house to see them. Whenever it was opening day of deer season, squirrel season, you know, whatever. It didn't matter whose weekend it was, or if I had something going on in my life and it was his weekend, you know, we done what was in best interest of the kids and not what was best for us.
Well, that's evident in Dylan, and we're still working on Luke. So, Luke, when you see this, your invitation is open. He's a little more shy than his brother, though.
Yes, but I was blessed. I have two of the most amazing boys.
Yeah.
And Luke, you know, being that one that was born and you know was the topic of discussion today, and good Lord, he's grown into such a. When I see him, because he's like 6. How tall is he? He's
6'1".
Yeah, 6'1", big old boy. You know, and it's just you know, it's like I still remember when you were going through all this, when your mama was 16 and pregnant with you, and then you were, you know, born and you were so little, and now you're huge.
And seeing him be a daddy now.
Oh, I know, it's crazy.
You know, and you know, and experiencing the grandparenthood has been awesome.
And what's the name of your grandson?
Timmy. So my dad was Timothy Leon, and Luke is Timothy Luke, and goes by Luke. And then he, kept the tradition, and it's Timothy Lee.
Cute. So during your past trauma and your teenage pregnancy, who do you think was being like Berl during your time?
It's hard to say just one, because like I said, I did have a village. One, I would say, is my mama, Glenda. You know, she was always a rock in my life and always took care, not just me, but if you know my mama, you know how welcome you are. You're going to get fed and you're going to get some good food.
Yes.
And you're going to, know
Chicken and
that you're
dumplings.
loved. Yes. Just ask Dylan. Whenever he was in school, she would bring him chicken and dumplings. All he'd say is, Mom, I really miss your chicken and dumplings. Next day, there it is.
He's petted.
But, however, I've been still trying to mention the chocolate cobbler, and I hadn't got that yet. But,
So Memo Glenda.
Get on that cobbler.
but and then, of course, Mom, even though she was going through so much, she was always there for me. And, we're each other's ride or die, I guess. We
For sure.
fight like siblings a lot of times and make up just the same. But, I remember Sivy and Timmy, always being there, and especially for Mom during that time too. She really leaned on her big sister a lot, and we was there a lot. And then all of my aunts and uncles was very, very supportive.
Cool. So one of the things that I had on here that I probably should have said earlier today, but or earlier in the podcast, but how difficult was it to choose life knowing yours was going to drastically change?
That I really didn't even think about it.
Okay.
I mean, I knew it was going to be a big change in my life.
Right.
I guess from the time I found out I was pregnant, then from that till today, I don't live for myself, anymore. I live for my boys, and I just knew that I just wanted to be the absolute best mom. And me and Derek and I both agreed whenever I found out I was pregnant, and I'd even talked to Mom about it too, is I didn't want Luke to suffer anything because we were young and made the choice that we chose. We didn't want him to suffer because of that.
And now tell us what life looks like for you today.
So I'm very happily married to Mr. Woodall, Jesse. And it's so funny that our paths did not cross until they did 10 years ago, 10 years ago.
Has it been that long already?
It has. Whew, no. But we have two wonderful stepdaughters, and that I love dearly. And both my boys and 4 grandsons. Nobody can have me a girl. But I will definitely take them little boys. They make my world a better place.
And there'll be a picture of them that'll pop up. So tell us about you guys go to Nunley United Methodist Church. You work from home, right?
I do marketing from home.
And then you volunteer with
EMA. Yeah. Thanks. Actually, I think you two started that journey.
We did, yeah.
I was kind of voluntoed. I think it was during the Pinewood flood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were doing damage assessments.
Yeah.
And then whenever Pete took over, he was like, "Oh, don't think you're going anywhere."
Oh, yeah. No.
And I keep getting more and more involved, and I mean, my heart's really led that way. I love helping the community any way I can.
And me and Jim were talking about it, and he said that he thought it came from his dad's side of the family, but maybe it's the mom's side because
Yeah.
you've got it too.
Yeah.
What about, we put on here, is there anything you want us to go over with you as far as like promotions or new job or anything? And you went right back to family. It's just all about family for you.
Yes.
And I think speaks to your decision in life with Luke. I think it also speaks to like the legacy that your dad and Tim left with you because they were all about family. And then we talked about people that shaped you into the person that you were today, but is there anything that you want to add to that at all? Anything you want to add just as we're going through stuff? I just don't want to miss anything if you feel like there's something else to say.
No, I'm kind of blank right now. I'm sure there is, but right now it's...
And then I'm just making sure we've covered everything. You did tell me a fun fact last night when we were texting that what's going to be happening on Tuesday.
So Tuesday is a law and safety appreciation dinner. And whenever Tim was killed in the car accident, Buck, Mandy King started, and some others in Centerville started a Gotcha Award through the chamber. And it's if there is a anybody in emergency services, whether it's a volunteer service or law enforcement, EMS, anything. But there is someone that goes above and beyond, because if you knew Tim, he went above and beyond. Whether it was going every day to, there were some women, I think it was that whenever it was shop till it stops.
Yeah.
Or I think is what it was. But people would donate clothes and they would wash them in the basement and have to carry the clothes upstairs. And he walked in and saw them doing that and got onto them and made them leave that basket of clothes at the bottom. And every day he stopped by there to carry it up the steps for them, because he didn't want them to get hurt. And so, it was just, he went above and beyond even his duties, and because that was the kind of person he is. So they have an award for that. And we get to present that. And it's also the 7-year anniversary that he was killed in the head-on collision.
Yep.
It's going to be a heavy night.
Yes.
So this podcast has been about how you can come out of tragedy from being a small child and your father murdered. Just having so much grief that came along with that throughout your childhood, and then ending up with a teenage pregnancy and still finding hope along the way, and coming out of it now on this side of it in adulthood with saying that looking back, he probably saved her life, as well as now there are grandbabies that have come in the mix and all the things. And I'm going to say it again. If you know Valerie, and my mama says this too about you all the time, if you know Valerie, you love her. You just do. She's just like cotton candy being around you. And so we hope that somewhere out there that there is hope found for somebody who's gone through something like Valerie has, because if she can go through all those things and come out of it just living life the way she does to help others and to put others first, we just hope that gives somebody some hope and some peace that can only be found in Christ.
And that's what, I hear it all the time, and it kind of, I'm like, but a lot of people will say, well, God won't give you no more than you will handle. There's actually no scripture that says that at all. But what it does say is that you can give it to the Lord. And I think you have to look at the positive and you give the rest to the Lord.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite scriptures is be still and know that I am God. And that's one, and because I struggle with that, because I want to do it all myself and fix it all myself. But you got to put it at his feet, and you got to pray about it. And if you're going through something in life, pray about it and find a way that you can gain strength from that and do good with what you're going through, instead of, playing the victim card. And, again, like Tim said, suck it up, cupcake, and make it into something positive. And I hear him say that a lot in my life. And, you can cry or you can smile and be happy in life. And that's what you choose.
Yep. And you get to choose. Mm-hmm. And when we're Christ followers, we know that we're here to spread love and joy to others, and that our eternity means more than this world for us. And so we've got peace in that. We've got joy in that.
Yes.
And understand it as soon as you close your eyes. The last time you close your eyes on this earth, when you open them in the next, your dad and Buck's going to be right there waiting on you.
That's what I said. A lot of people fear dying, and I'm not saying I want to go anytime soon, because I gotta be there for my grandbabies. But the one piece to it all is nobody needs to be sad whenever I'm gone, because I'm gonna be very happy.
I know you will. Well, on that, y'all are killing me. Yeah, y'all bear with me, and we'll close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time with Val. We thank you for her strength. We thank you for her story. We just pray, Lord, that you take it and you put it out there in the world, so that if there's another young lady out there, Lord, that's dealing with teen pregnancy, or if you've got someone that's dealt with a loss like Val has, Lord, we just pray that they hear this and they see it and they learn from Val and they learn the strength and they look to you, Lord, and they, on Val's words, on quoting scripture, she said, be still. Know that you are God. And so we just thank you so much for her today, for being here and giving that to us, and you use it for your will to grow your kingdom. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Well, that'll do it for us today. Thank you so much, of course, for being here with us, sweetie, and thank you for being with us on the podcast. We look forward to our next episode, which again airs every other Wednesday. Remember that our Be Like Berl podcast is inspired by our book character, Berl Squeaver, as well as Officer Buck. If you want to learn more about Officer Buck, you can also get these books. You can get them by logging on to our website, berlsqueaver.com, and click the purchase link up top. And remember to stay safe, be like Berl, and be like Buck too. And God bless.